we're live on, live on Facebook.
So, but it's still not visual, it's audio, right?
No, it's just a picture. I just put up a picture of Dennis.
Okay.
Since I figure that's probably what we'll end up talking about.
Yes.
But I can change it. We can change it to all kinds of things. All right. So,
All right, I'm streaming now too.
okay. Jen, I don't know if you're planning to stream anywhere. If you are.
No, I'm good.
Okay, cool. All right.
All right, are we good to go, Amy?
We're good to go.
All right. So, Dr. Ramsland, can you start off with introducing yourself and give us a little brief background on your resume?
Okay. I'm Dr. Katherine Ramsland. I teach forensic psychology and behavioral criminology in the graduate program at DeSales University in Pennsylvania. I'm a researcher and a writer. I have recently published my 73rd book,
wow.
Many of which are on extreme offenders, mass murderers, serial killers, spree killers. I talk with serial killers, sometimes to produce books and sometimes just for research. And I have had a long forensic career. It's probably been 27, 28 years now.
Which is your favorite book to write so far?
Oh, go ahead.
To write so far?
Yeah.
I had a great time writing a book with my horse. So
okay.
He's not a serial killer.
That you know of.
No. I don't know if I have a favorite. I have enjoyed the one that just came out, The Serial Killer's Apprentice, where I talked with Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. about being an apprentice to Dean Corll, the Candyman in Houston. And he gave me lots and lots of hours of his time exploring the dynamics of the accomplice relationship, which has not been explored very deeply. And so I really liked doing that because it was breaking new ground. He was very intelligent, reflective, and it was a pretty good book to write.
Nice.
So what is your opinion on Wayne Henley? Do you think he's remorseful? And do you think, in your opinion, he should get a second chance in society?
Well, he never wanted to be a serial killer. He wanted to be a minister. That was what he set out to be. He was just like a hippie kid who, had a lot of friends, cared about people. He wasn't a psychopath. But the main book that came out on the case is by Jack Olson, which was written or published in 1974. He never interviewed Henley or Brooks. Written largely from interviews with victims' families and police reports. So no real sense of Henley from that book. And that has been kind of the standard that people have used to try to understand him. So I would say, his first statement to me when we made contact was that he took full responsibility and I was never going to change his mind about that. I know a lot more about the teenage brain and, certain mitigating factors that he wasn't aware of. And over the course of months, I think I've kind of softened him on his, because he was pulled into it when he was 15 years old and not able to really deal with this adult predator who had a very clear agenda and already was using David Brooks to carry it out. And Wayne was actually supposed to be a victim. Brooks brought him in to be killed. So I think that there's a lot more nuance to the story than most people realize if they only look at some of those very early books on the case. There was a sex trafficking operation, just like both of them said, but the police did not explore. But we have lots and lots of evidence of its existence. And it was something that scared these teenage boys. What could they do but do what Corll wanted them to do? And I think that Wayne developed a callousness. Certainly he stayed with it for a year and a half, but he's the only accomplice to have killed the adult predator to end it. The only one of all the ones that I've researched that has to be say something for him, that he would kill him to save his friends and end it, and then immediately told police. He could have walked away and been a hero, saving his friends and himself and killing this guy. Instead, he immediately told the officers about the victims that were buried in the boat shed and on the beach, and took them to see, because he wanted it to be over. He wanted the families to know where their sons were. So that, I think, counts in his favor as having genuine remorse and just a genuine sense that what he had done was awful and wrong. He's certainly not a danger to anyone now. He's been in prison 50 years, and lots of killers serve much less time than that. So I don't think there's any real reason to keep him there, unless the only thing you think prison is about is revenge, essentially, or punishment. You have to be punished, so you must be here the rest of your life. Retribution.
Did he get life with the possibility of parole?
No, well, he comes up for parole, but it's sort of a pro forma. Like, he's been told, this is never going to happen. And he has come up for parole, and every time he's denied. So whether the possibility is there, I think is a question that hangs in the air. And I think also where he is makes a difference. Texas is a bit more punitive than, Minnesota or Massachusetts. So I think that you have to take that kind of culture into account as well.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And also, I think he's been presented as having helped Dean Corll kill 27 boys. And he's been presented as bringing his friends for Dean Corll to kill. And none of that's true. He did confess to some of the murders, but not 27. Corll killed some on his own. He killed some only with David Brooks. He killed some with the two of them. But I think the case has been misrepresented, and I didn't just listen to him. We did a lot of research as well. I had a co-author who's an investigative journalist and a documentary maker, and she had already spent 10 years digging up all the information on the sex trafficking operation. So the story, there's a lot more to the story than I think people realize, in part because we've been using Jack Olson's incomplete book as the standard on what this case is about.
Oh, now I've got
Do you know how
homework.
many approximate victims that Henley did take part in with Corll?
He, I think, in a statement, admitted to 8. They prosecuted him for 6 because they didn't have the body of one of them. Anyway, they prosecuted him for 6 because they had certain criteria for what they were going to prosecute. They prosecuted Brooks only for 1, in part because of the way they allowed his father to influence his statement. So it's a complicated and strange case, but both of them were convicted, both of them. And Brooks died in prison from COVID a couple of years ago. So he was convicted of 1, and Henley was convicted of 6.
So was he hands-on, or was he just present during the murders? Do you know that?
He did some hands-on. He was forced to when he was 15. He committed his first murder at the age of 15 because Corll basically told him he had tricked him with one case and told him, you're in this now, and now you have to prove yourself. And so, yeah, he was hands-on. He strangled and shot the victims that he killed.
So while researching and writing this book,
that's the problem. He did do these things. We're not pulling punches here. He did do them, and he says he did them, and he describes what happened, how it happened, why he kept going through with it. But you still have to wonder about such things as how he got leveraged into it, the impulsivity of the teenage brain that we know a lot more about now than we ever did 50 years ago. So I make a case that Coral, the adult predator, knew how to groom both of these boys into becoming his accomplices. And both were more or less trapped by what things that they needed that he provided. So it's I think an important book in that we're really looking at not just the vulnerability of these two guys, but of kids today and what adult predators are doing to find partners, not just prey, not just victims, but partners among vulnerable teens. So part of the book, and one of the reasons that Wayne wanted to do this book was to have some way to redeem himself a little bit, to be able to put statements out there of what people should be wary of. And so the whole last chapter of the book is tips for parents, counselors, and guardians, teachers, to what to look for, because these predators know how to groom the whole community in order to go in for, getting what they want from vulnerable kids.
Love that.
So somebody asked, did Henley ever say if he or Dean knew who John David Norman was?
We have asked Wayne. Wayne did not know, but Brooks talked a bit about some of the things that Coral had told him. We knew Ames Roby was part of it, or not Ames Roby. There's an Ames Roby's a psychiatrist. That's somebody else. My co-author did all that research, so I don't have all the names right to hand, but Coral had a phone number that led to that. Two of his victims had been hanging around with this child pornographer who was part of John David Norman's circle. There were statements that they had been at Coral's parties, so there are a number of these links that were made that the police never followed up on at the time, that had they done so, they would have seen more. In fact, there was a report of, and we never did find this document, but 9 of the boys appeared in child pornography in photographs.
Wow.
So, and we know that one definitely did, because that's the one that convicted David Brooks.
Wow.
So I know this case was so long ago, but during your writing and researching, did you ever get in touch with any of the victims' families? And if so, what did they think about Henley possibly being released one day?
No, that's not the book I write. When I write with these offenders, I write from their point of view. Like with Dennis Rader as well. I did talk to the victims' families, but I did not let their story be part of it, because it doesn't belong in an autobiographical book. So that I have a particular way. I'm not writing a true crime book. I have a particular way of delving into the psyche of these serial killers. And even though I might talk with victims' families, I don't want them to be part of the story. They have their own story that should be separate from what the offenders do. And at this point, most of those families are not around anymore. And I don't
Right.
think that they would like what I'm doing. I frankly don't believe that they would want any kind of redemptive framework for Henley. So, and that's not really what I was doing, and it was not what I was doing with Rader either. And the victims' family members that I did talk to that were associated with Rader's victims, I spent a lot of time talking with them, but for different reasons. It wasn't about putting them in the book. It just never was about that. I don't know if you can understand the nuance here. I'm not writing a true crime book. I'm exploring, it's a psychological exploration of in Henley's case of the accomplice relationship, and in Rader's case of
Right. I understand that completely.
okay. It's hard to explain because sometimes people assume I'm writing more of a biography or a true crime book where I bring in a lot of points of view, but that's not what I'm doing.
No, I understand.
Right.
I actually have one that I started writing with Kenneth Bianchi,
Yeah.
and he had a complete manuscript kind of already written, and he gave it to me, and we started working on it. Well, no, so I started working on like helping him to like, expand it and add some things in because he had a lot of holes. And that's normal because when I tell a story, like if I tell you a story about my past, I'm going to leave things out because it makes sense to me as I'm telling it, but it doesn't make sense to you because you don't know my full background.
Right.
And so, we're kind of going through some of those things, and he fizzled out when we got to Kelly.
I hear he tried that with Anthony Mioli as well. I know they worked on something for a long time. I don't know whatever became of it though.
I don't know, but I'm trying to get him back in the swing of it, but he's being a hard one to budge at the moment.
And how are you exploring the dynamics of how he became a killer?
So we're exploring what he's written first,
Okay.
and because he maintains his complete innocence.
Oh, okay.
Okay, maintains his complete innocence. So it was one of those things of feeling like it was going to end up having to be a sandwich. It was going to have to be something that started out with me kind of telling like how I came in contact with him because I worked with him. I worked with him and his legal people in 2021. And that's how I got to know him. And so, and then, kind of let him tell his story and then kind of round it out with, okay, let me close this sandwich and put on the other piece of bread.
Yeah, I'm more inclined to work only with killers who want to explore how they became this way. That's more my interest. I don't, if they want to play games like that, I don't want to do. I mean, maybe you think he's innocent. I don't think he's innocent, but
I'll tell you honestly, I haven't ever explored the California crimes because when I came into the picture, we were working on the Bellingham appeal that he had from his where they had given him 10 extra years for not showing up to his parole hearing. So there was that. So I don't know anything about the California one because I never dealt with that.
Okay. I guess I know even if I put myself out there and some offender wants to now talk to me, obviously they could be lying, they could be exaggerating. There's a few I could name, I'm not going to name, who I know I wouldn't work with because I know right off the bat they're just going to lie, and so I wouldn't work with them. And Rader was interesting because he was such an outlier to the many formulas that we've come up with for serial killers. And I really was curious, and he genuinely wanted to explore. And we spent 5 years. It wasn't any brief process by any means. I think he still misrepresented himself, and I knew the DA, so I had plenty of information from her and from the cops and from other correspondents. But I still needed him to want to put the effort into it. He read books, he thought about things, he responded to standardized tests and whatnot. And that's more my interest because there's only so much time a person has, and these things are time intensive. Al Carlisle, the prison psychologist in Utah who talked to Ted Bundy among others, understood this. He almost invented the long form analysis where he spent many hours, sometimes years, talking to some of these offenders to try to understand them. And that would be the kind of person that I would talk with. If Wayne Henley had said, well, I don't really want to do this, then I'm done. I'm not going to try to probe it out of him. If he needed to be willing to want this exploration, even though it was going to give him nightmares, which it did, maybe some PTSD. It was going to be tough for him, but I needed him to want to do this before I was willing to spend the amount of time and money that I did spend on it.
Right. So with Dennis Rader, and I don't know if this is, feel free to just say, Amy, shut up. With the new like task force that was happening and stuff like that. I heard, bits and pieces just because I know some people who are involved in it outside of Seth. I know other people who are involved in it. And so I heard like these little different bits and pieces, and I just kept thinking, wouldn't he just own up to it like he did to his other crimes? And I thought, this is kind of a waste. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, it comes out and there's a headline and it's like, okay, well, this one wasn't him.
That was a case I worked, so I can speak to that. Right, so let's just frame it with who is Dennis Rader, because we don't want to assume everybody in the audience knows. So Dennis Rader was a serial killer who began, at least what we know of, began killing in 1974 and quit in 1991. Killed 10 people in Wichita, Kansas. Mostly entered their homes to strangle them. A couple of them he then took out of the home and dumped, outside. His first kill was a family of 4, the Oteros, a father, mother, and 2 young children, a 9-year-old boy and 11-year-old girl. So his fetish was to bind them. And then once he did the things he wanted to do, he had to kill them because he had to eliminate witnesses. So when he was picked up, he got away with this for 30 years. He was in 2004, began a cat and mouse game with the police because he was kind of having some fun. He picked out another victim, but was interrupted in his approach to that particular crime. So he didn't end up killing her. But before he was able to do that, on a later date, they arrested him because he had made a mistake during his cat and mouse games by asking, could he send them a computer disk? Would they be able to trace it? And they said, what? Okay, no, we can't. And, lied to him. And as a result, they were able to figure out where this disk had been written and trace it to Dennis Rader. So that's the quick story. So he's arrested in 2005. Time goes by, and a Oklahoma sheriff named Eddie Burden, which I think was started in, let me think, I think it was 2022, end of 2022 into 2023. Burden got the notion that his cold case from 1976, a young girl who walked out of a laundromat and vanished and never came back, that Rader's proximity, being in southeastern Kansas on the border of Oklahoma, suggested that maybe he had grabbed her because he had made all these journal entries, and one of which referred to a laundromat. And so Burden decided that it was worth exploring. He came and he interviewed him, and then he began looking at a number of other cases that he thought Rader could be good for and that he had not told the truth. So he got the FBI involved. He got Kansas Bureau of Investigation and Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation and Missouri. And I think he brought some team up from Arkansas for another cold case, thinking that these were all, Rader related cases. So Rader was given immunity. So a lot of people who say the reason Rader won't confess to these cases is because these are death penalty states. Well, first of all, he's 9 years old now. He said he's in bad health. It's not as if by the time you get to the death penalty, he won't already be dead. So that's not really that big of an issue. But they did give him immunity if he would confess to everything he had done. So the death penalty wasn't even relevant. And his question, which I agree with him, is, why wouldn't I confess? It would make me even more famous. I'd get headlines all over the place. These are the things that drive Rader, that motivate him. He loves fame. More than anything else, he loves fame. So his question is, He says he will not confess to something he didn't do. And his question to everyone who comes, why wouldn't I confess to this? So the interesting case, the one that was most like his other cases, was the Garber case in Missouri. She was a young woman, I think it was 1990, when he was on the census, so he was traveling out of state. She was found bound with multiple cords and ropes and whatnot, the way Rader liked to bind his victims, and some of which were similar to ropes he had used. She was found dumped on an abandoned farm property, and he had fetishes for farms. So this all looks pretty good for Rader. Right timing, right, fairly close to where he grew up in southeastern Kansas, an area that he definitely drove through. He had a project list that he gave to me of 55 projects of people who might have been victims. And he talked about once picking up a woman whose car had stalled on the highway. So it wasn't out of the question that he might have picked up a young woman walking alone. And she was walking, as we later found out, on her way to work. That was the road that she would take. So a lot of the things lined up. This looked pretty good. If of all the cases that were proposed, this is probably the closest to his MO. And even he was intrigued with it. He wanted to know more. He thought the rope tying was pretty sloppy, though. So the Missouri team of detectives went down to interview him, and they came away saying when he talks about his cases, he's alive, he's excited, he's interested. But when he talked about this case, he barely knew anything about it. He wasn't really that hooked into it. And they said the difference between the way he talked about these cases made us pull back and think he's probably not our chief suspect. They did have a suspect who ended up getting killed in a motorcycle accident. And then people came forward who had been witnesses to the murder, who named him as the killer. So it was not Dennis Rader, despite all the many things that seemed to link him. It was not Dennis Rader. And so the Missouri team of detectives, Lori Howard and Rhonda Wise, are to be credited with, not falling into the logic is truth notion, but sticking with, no, we really need evidence. We're not just going to go with this because it sounds like he might be a good suspect. And as a result, they were able to solve their case with genuine evidence and good, solid witnesses.
Someone on TikTok said, what about the latest digging of the area in Oklahoma? Sorry, I'm not wearing my glasses.
There's been a lot of digging. I'd have to know what they're talking about. There was digging in Wichita. There was digging outside Wichita. There was an idea of a BTK symbol on a barn, but apparently it was recently made. So, people who are now getting all this publicity could easily be trying to spoof some of this. I know that this sheriff said that there were items of interest that he dug up, but none of which have been tested and found to be evidence thus far.
The pantyhose?
Well, the pantyhose that were sitting on the ground. All right. They were on the property that had been formerly where Dennis's home was. So he's arrested in 2005, and you pick up pantyhose in 2022 or 2023 and think that's a murder weapon. It could be anybody's. There's a park that directly borders this place, but also Rader and Burden picked it up with his bare hands. That's one thing. You can't really test it then. But the other thing is, Rader said that he tied up plants on stakes with knotted pantyhose from his wife's stash of cast-offs.
His tomatoes, especially.
Yeah, lots of people do that. So it could be that. Here's the thing. Anything that's been proposed so far as potential evidence has an alternate explanation, including the laundromat and journal entry. Rader said that was a laundromat in Wichita, and the journal entry bears that out. So anything that has been proposed so far is ambiguous. The charges have not, we now have this word puzzle that Rader wrote in, and you can ask your friend about that, that Rader wrote in 2004 as part of the cat and mouse game. So it's a kind of word puzzle, a word search puzzle where he put in things like serviceman, realtor, laundromat, et cetera, et cetera. And so suddenly the sheriff comes out with this kind of switching around method of finding names. And he found the name of his victim, and the road the laundromat was on is in that word search puzzle, and a number of other things. Well, so is his name. So is my name. Did Rader see into the future? Eddie, the guy who just defeated him in the sheriff voting, his name is in there. It's not hard if you crisscross through the word puzzle any which way you want to find anyone's name in there. So right. It's, again, if it's evidence, bring charges. It's not evidence. It's being played out in the media. It's not being played out in the courtroom. So you have to keep that in mind. If they had brought charges in Garber, the Garber case, I mean, it wasn't Rader. There was not one shred of evidence that tied. It was all circumstantial, and not one piece of real evidence tied him to Garber. And it turns out he's not the guy for that one. So we have to be careful, especially in this age now of all the amateur sleuths who are trying to figure it all out and piecing things together logically. Logic is not the same as truth or evidence. You need logic to make a case, but you need a lot more than logic to make your case.
Just like legal innocence and actual innocence are not always the same thing.
Exactly. Absolutely not. Yeah. So I don't know. That's a long explanation for what's going on, but I think it's important to keep in mind that if something's being played out in the media, you have to ask yourself why. And you have to ask yourself, why wouldn't Rader confess? Exactly as you just asked. Why wouldn't he confess? He loves attention. He loves seeing his name in the press. Why wouldn't he confess? So I think that's always the question. Sorry.
That was one of the things that I asked him, because back when he was, still on the loose, there was a website called catchbtk.com.
Mm-hmm.
And it was run by Tom Voigt, and it had, message boards, and it had chat rooms and stuff like that in it. And Tom was always convinced that Dennis was in there in the group somehow, discussing with people and everything else. And so that was one
very doubtful. He didn't know that much about it.
He was like, what? I don't even know what that is. But I asked him, I said, well, why did you had it made? Why? And he said that they had just done an anniversary thing in the news about him. And he was like, I didn't have to worry about, small children and all those things. And he said he missed the cat and mouse. He missed the game. He missed the playing. And I was like, okay, well, that's really interesting. But he did. He literally had it made. He could have just kept his mouth shut and gone into the night like Jack the Ripper.
He knows that, and he has been kicking himself, ever since he made that error. He knows he could have just stopped. But the thing is, people think he stopped in 1991, and that's not his story. His story is that he failed. He was still on the lookout for victims. He just wasn't. His life circumstances had changed. He didn't have the same kind of opportunities, and when he did have opportunities, people didn't come home. So as I said, he gave me a long list of potential victims, and it went past 1991.
Dang. So I'm a law professor, and now I'm going to have to revamp all of the stuff that when we start talking about like the death penalty being a deterrent, I'm like, it seems like Dennis Rader is the only person in the world that it seemed to have been a deterrent for, because if you line it up with what we say is when he stopped and when Kansas reinstated the death penalty, It's like, okay, well, maybe that was something, but now
No, it
you
wasn't.
destroyed
In
my
fact,
whole lecture.
no, no. In the police interrogation, he did not know that he couldn't get the death penalty.
Interesting.
It wasn't, that wasn't even a consideration in his mind.
Sorry, Andrew, I totally hijacked you.
Oh, it's okay. So, Dr. Ramsland, this is a two-part question. Whether you say yes or no, I'll go on. But with Dr. Michael Stone's scale and Dr. Brucado's scale, do you believe in that at all?
Well, it's not a religion.
Well, no. I mean, like, do you? I mean, my question is, where would you place them on the scale if you like abide by that scale with your research and everything like
Well,
that?
I mean, that's just a way to try to understand the level of, I mean, I don't even use the word evil. I just think it's too fraught with religious ideas and a variety of interpretations. So I personally wouldn't even use that, but I really like Michael Stone. I mean, he's passed now, but I appreciated what he was doing. He put a lot of work into it. I've never seen a collection of crime books like his. It was unbelievable. But it wasn't scientific, and he's never said it was scientific. It was really a way to make comparative analyses to, just the malice involved, so that when you say a murderer, that's someone who murders, their husband in self-defense, obviously is not going to be the same as a torture killer. So Raider, I don't know. In fact, I think Brucado told me they didn't put Raider in. I think they did, but Raider was not really a torturer, despite the name. He named himself "Find Them, Torture Them, Kill Them" because he wanted to inspire fear in Wichita and to feel powerful. But he didn't actually do tortures like some of these guys. Bittaker and Norris, for example, and Cottingham, and some of them who hold victims for days and violate them over and over. Dean Corll was horrible. Raider isn't even on that scale. So, but yes, he invaded homes of ordinary people and strangled them and disrupted, the lives of their families and their lives, obviously. 10 people. So that's more than someone who's only killed 3. It's less than someone who's killed 27. So I don't know. How do you make those comparisons? I don't know. I wouldn't have done a scale like that myself. I don't know that it has any particular meaning, except that it's just a way to have a discussion about how do we compare this person to that person in terms of the kinds of things they've done and the way they developed. It's just a way to get a handle on, some of what these people are. I mean, we have over 5,000 serial killers documented, and many mass murderers, and and rapists who torture don't kill. So are they worse? Maybe. So it's hard to get a handle on when we're talking about these large populations. It's hard to talk about them without having some kind of comparative analysis type of scale. So it's not something I would say I believe in or don't believe in. I think it was a valiant effort. I know that there's also one that's offered to the courts as a way to mitigate malice, degrees of malice. That's a different scale. That would be useful for juries. But I don't know how really useful it is to put, the 22 levels. It really depends on what your purpose is for using it.
Somebody said, who lived in the community, said he definitely inspired fear in the community.
Yes, he definitely did. And I knew the DA even before I ever talked to Raider himself. I knew her, and I knew other people there. And I've had many people talk to me since the book came out. I think it came out in 2016. Lots of people have talked to me about how terrified they were. Yes, he did. And that was the whole point of that name. He did not want to leave his name to chance. He didn't want to have a stupid name. So he named himself. And that just shows you the kind of control he needed to have, because control is largely what drove him. He wanted power over people.
Right. So let me ask you this. Sorry, Andrew, to hijack you again. But we have, the true crime community, I swear, they can say take Ted Bundy, and they can watch the same thing repackaged in 50 different ways, and they'll consume it as if it's new material, because he's one of those cases that people are fascinated with. So we've continued to have serial killers since the 70s and the 80s, but why are we so obsessed with those? What is it about them?
There's certain killers that are mediagenic and certain killers that are not, and it has a lot to do with the culture. When a lot of the 70s and 80s serial killers continued to be fascinating to us. Gacy and, as you mentioned, Bundy, Ramirez, some of those. And there's been some, in this decade as well, that I think will play out over and over again. But I don't know. That's more of a cultural, a sociological question. I don't really study the sociology of all this. I'm much more interested in the cases, the case details, the way people, the trajectories of their development, than I am in, the larger cultural issues. I really don't study those things. I mean, I can talk about them just the way anybody else can, without really much information, but I prefer not to. I prefer to stay within my expertise.
Oh, I love case details. I love reading the documents and seeing the evidence, and give me discovery packets and stuff all day long.
Yeah, me too.
The lady who lived there, she said that it was she said that they had forgotten, but when he started again, it was even worse for the community psyche.
Yeah, because he came out, with the cat and mouse game was crazy. I mean, he'd leave these dolls in cereal boxes as his joke.
So weird.
It was very weird, and he started writing it. He says, "I'll tell you this story." So around that time, when the attorney made the announcement he's going to write a book about the 7 cases of BTK, and I was working for the Crime Library, which is the Court TV website at the time, and one of our writers wrote the BTK story. And Rader claims that the chapters he wrote were his own doing, but in fact, all of the chapter headings were from our story. I know he plagiarized those. He insists to me, no, he never looked anything up. I said, you can't possibly have, by coincidence, had all of our chapter headings. So much for wanting to write his own story. I think he just took what was already done and presented that. But yeah, they came in these boxes or these mailings, these chapter by chapter about BTK. The word puzzle, came out there. He definitely wanted people to know he was still around and looking for victims. He wanted people to believe that.
Oh.
And he was. I mean, he did pick somebody out. He had a very elaborate plan. The most elaborate plan so far was for this particular person. He had one picked out, but when he went, there was a construction crew in front of her house. So he had to postpone it. And by doing so, he left himself open, and he was caught before he could do it.
So was his last one I think it was an elderly woman or something like that?
Nope.
No?
There are people who claim they think they are the victim. There's one woman who wrote a whole book about her being the victim, but she's not. She's not the person, but I'm not naming the person. There was an elderly woman as part of the spree that he went in. Anna was her name. He was in her house waiting for her, and she didn't come home. So he sent her a packet to let her know how close she came to dying. But that was before 1991. I think that was 85-ish, somewhere in there.
That would be so wild to come home and be like, oh, okay, here's a note for me.
Yeah. Well, he was frustrated that he had to leave because he had obligations. He was married, he had kids, he had things he had to do. He was frustrated that he had planned all this and was waiting for her and she didn't come. And so he wanted her to know that he did have power over her, and she moved. She left the city, as far as I know, right away.
Somebody asked why humanize him.
Because he's human.
I agree with that. We've been having some interviews where we have been talking with like Jonathan Cruz, who is technically a spree killer, I guess, but he's called the Purge Killer. And we've talked to some other people. And, we've had some people who were kind of frustrated that we weren't like, ew, you're so bad, everything else, because we've been asking, like, how did you get here?
Well, here's the thing. She's asking the question, why humanize him, as if humanizing is inherently a compassionate thing to do. It isn't. Humanizing is simply exploring who this person is and how does it relate to us all as part of our humanity, and how can we use what we learn about him to now look at budding, kids who might become budding violent individuals. What can we do for early intervention as a result of learning from these individuals? So humanizing isn't necessarily compassionate. It's simply exploratory to try to find the roots of violence. That's all part of our humanity. To ignore that is to leave ourselves in jeopardy.
Someone asked if he spent hours at that home as well, waiting for that lady. Do we know that?
He spent several hours. I don't know how many.
That's so weird.
There was another woman who was his neighbor, Maureen Hedge, who was on a date, and he sat in her closet for several hours, not very happy about it. And then she came in and brought this man in, and he thought he was going to have to kill the guy too, but the guy left, and then he killed her. But he stayed there for several hours. Yeah.
I've got to put my glasses on to see these. Okay, let's see. Someone said he was seen as a person in uniform to protect us. Another person said if they were born this way, why make it seem like it's noticeable when oh yeah, we're not discussing Idaho.
No.
Idaho's still open, and I really don't think it's fair for anybody to talk about that case when it's open. I thought so. He did hide in the cupboard first. That's so weird. I can't imagine. He's an interesting character, though.
Who are we talking about?
Dennis.
Oh.
When I sent him so my first interaction with him, I had sent something and he didn't respond back. I sent another thing. He didn't respond back. I never used any of the people that I know that know him and be like, hey, I know so-and-so, I just was trying to do it organically on my own. And then I sent him a Christmas card and he responded. And of course he wrote on it and sent it back. And so
that's what he likes to do. Yeah.
I was like, this is so weird. Why did he send it back to me?
Because he can't store it. He gets so much mail, and he's only allowed a certain amount in his cell. And now he's actually been moved to the infirmary. So he doesn't have a place to store things. He doesn't want to throw them out.
Yeah, I've heard he's not doing well at all.
He's pretty vibrant. I mean, he's old. He doesn't get exercise, and he does suffer from scoliosis. But so, Andrew, you asked me. You said a two-part question. You asked me the first part. Did you get the second part out? I don't remember.
Oh yeah. Where he would fit on the scale. That's what I was wondering.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Probably somewhere of the 22 levels, he's probably like, 18, 19, something like that.
Oh,
but let me just say, because you sort of threw out this, are they born this way? First of all, serial killers are not a criminal type. It's a description of a behavior. you have murdered at least 2 people on 2 distinctly different occasions. That's the FBI definition. That is something they do, not what they are. Within that description, you have some typologies. So some of them have certain things in common. But I think people confuse serial killer with psychopath. And primary psychopaths do appear to have certain neurological kinds of issues that would suggest they are born this way. But not all psychopaths are violent, let alone killers, let alone serial killers. So we really can't say something like a serial killer is born this way, because it's just a description of a specific criminal behavior. They might be born psychopaths, or they might become callous through environmental things like head injuries, abuse, neglect, things like that, that then turn them into people who become violent. But it's such a range, and it's such a complicated issue. There is no simple answer, and there's absolutely no formula for whether they are made or born.
Now I'm going back and thinking about all the people that I've encountered. I actually had, when I was in law school, I started doing some guardian ad litem work, and I came across a kid that made me really, really, really like dig into this question, because it just, I don't know, there was a lot of environmental stuff from family, that played a part in how much did he potentially learn from things that, he saw and things like that. But I don't know.
There's a lot of good work coming out of New Mexico on psychopathy and measuring, what we can with the brain. I would encourage anybody to read Kent Keel and his work. You can start with The Psychopath Whisperer, the book where he learned how to measure things, the neurological issues with the psychopath brain. And he has some chapters in there about kids at risk for becoming adult psychopaths. So there's plenty of material about it. It's just that there's just no simple answer to it. There just isn't.
So my mom asked a question.
Okay.
What was like Dennis's home life? I don't even know that. Was he ever in foster care, or he have 2 parents?
We had 2 parents, both sets of grandparents were intact. They were both living in southeastern Kansas on farms. He grew up an all-American boy. He was the oldest of 4 boys. His parents were, both there. He was raised in a religious home, and, he had friends in school. He had girlfriends. He was a shy guy, and one of the factors for him was that girls made him feel off balance, which he didn't like, because he was used to being the oldest boy and the one in charge, and girls made him feel, like, and also he wasn't a good student. So female teachers, he built resentment against them. And that's part of why he developed this notion about girl traps when he was an adolescent, because he wanted to keep girls under control. But he did have some girlfriends, and he got married and had kids.
And blended right in.
He had a couple of head injuries, one of which was his mother dropped him when he was a baby. I think all mothers do something like that. But
shh, don't tell her.
He turned blue, and they didn't get him any help. They didn't take him to the hospital at the time. And another time he was involved in a car accident when he was a teenager. But he did have an MRI. There wasn't, and none of his violence is organically driven. It's not from a lesion in the brain or some issue with his brain. So even though he has had some head injuries, they weren't serious enough for us to say that he became violent because of a head injury. There certainly are serial killers that have that in their background. And we can't deny those factors, but I don't think we see that kind of behavior in Dennis. He was able to control when he was doing very, very well.
Interesting. I find him and people like Ted Bundy and stuff, I find them the scariest because they could blend in. Because
Yeah.
they're the ones that you would be sitting next to at church having a conversation with, or, you know, talking to in the grocery line. And you would just think, oh, this is just normal person.
A lot of them are like that. Yes. So there's your scary story for the night. A lot of them are like that. And I mean, someone said to me yesterday, I think I was doing another podcast, and they said, well, you at least are in the position where you can spot them. Like, I would never say that. That leaves me very vulnerable. That's kind of an arrogant position. I would never say I can't be fooled by one of these guys, or women, for that matter. I certainly can be, and I have to always be alert to that.
I can see that.
Everybody I know who's in the field of psychopathy research says that all the experts will say, I can be fooled. And they have been, they have stories. And so none of them would say, oh, I know so much about this that I can spot them now. Nope. Mm-mm. And you'll see all these headlines. Like, I think the latest one was, oh, if a woman doesn't move her head around too much, she's more likely to be a psychopath. Or if you drink black coffee, or you like dark chocolate, or all these stupid headlines are so meaningless, because that is absolutely not going to tip you off to somebody who's a psychopath. And if you think so, you're putting yourself in a very vulnerable position.
Yeah. We have, there's a guy that we interviewed that claims he has 11 additional victims that have never been disclosed. And he said that he would disclose if there was a book written about it. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. I'll take one for the team. But, I noticed that in giving the information, it went from, I'll give you the information to, oh, I'm not going to give you the information outright.
Right.
And then it's become, a whole like, well, is he even telling the truth? Am I wasting my time here? What's going on?
That's the problem. They can leverage you. They can play these games with you. They want attention. They want you have to be very careful about what claims some people will make. And I wouldn't even say, even though I've just spent some time telling you why I don't think the things that are going on with the task force investigation have shown us anything, I still wouldn't say Dennis Rader's telling us the truth. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. I don't know. But I do know we haven't seen enough to say there's evidence against him for any of these murders that people are coming up with.
Yeah.
And so you always need corroborating evidence. I don't care what anybody wants to tell you. You always need that, because we have had plenty of serial killers who overstate their numbers for, whatever reason they want, who overstate it. And then it turns out they're not the person. Henry Lee Lucas, classic example. Keith Jesperson, another one. They like to play games. So just because someone's saying that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And the other thing that also happens, which I see on the part of police officers, detectives, is they may have somebody who's killed 3, and then they go, oh, I know there are a lot more than that. Based on what? Let's get actual evidence.
Yeah.
Let's get evidence.
That's what my goal is, because honestly, I feel kind of compelled now, because I'm like, what if there are these additional families out there who don't have closure? Or what if you have somebody who not only doesn't have closure, what if there's somebody who's also been wrongfully convicted? And I'm just like,
and that has happened.
Terrible.
Yes, that has happened with serial killers who, I think the best case on that was the Tommy Lynn Sells case in Chicago with the mother who was convicted of killing her son when it was in fact him who did it. So yeah, that's important. But so talk to the guy. I would just find out, what is he willing to tell you? What can you do to prove? Just say, give me one case that I can prove.
We're working case by case, and I'm going. He's kind of misdirected me already because he was trying to point me towards St. Augustine, but I realized that it's actually St. Petersburg, and I need to be going in the opposite direction. And so he was kind of like, "Oh wow, okay, you figured that out." Well, yeah. But part of it had to do with the fact of there's an ego that's involved, in there where you can go back and you can say things like, I don't think this is true. And then they're like, no, let me tell you this, and he's like, he came back and he was like, let me give you a little bit more. And so he gave me a little bit more and I kind of went from that. So we're in the process.
He doesn't sound like somebody who genuinely wants to have it out there. Because if he did, he'd be talking to you much more frankly and giving you coordinates and giving you everything you need.
Oh, yeah. He's playing a game, but he has the safety net of his life sentences already. He's got a federal and a state. So, he doesn't really care about what comes next from anything else. So it is a game. But again, like I said, I feel very compelled to just see if any of it's true, because if it is, I feel like I owe it to somebody because I've been put in this position to talk to this person. And I would feel really horrible if something came along.
No, I encourage you to pursue it until it's very clear he's really not going to give you anything. I'd encourage you to pursue it. Sure. Definitely.
It's frustrating though.
Yep. Time consuming too.
It is. I'm just like, you're like a child.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It's incredibly frustrating. But yes, it's interesting though, because again, it's at least in my wheelhouse because I like doing that research. We've been researching like property records and tracking down people who used to own like certain properties and stuff like that. And that kind of stuff I really like. So I don't get to do that as a professor anymore.
So do you visit him?
No. We're strictly on getting out with the texting.
So why don't you visit him and see his body language when he's talking to you?
He actually sent me a message today and said he was clearing. He said now that I've made progress, he said, I'm clearing a phone number off my list so that I can get you on. So I will be doing that.
All right. I don't want to ask, anything. If you're trying to get a book or something out of it, I don't want to ask.
I already have a publisher. I ghostwrite.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what kind of victims are they? What's his victim type?
So he technically, I don't know if he would fall under serial killer or not. But
11.
Well,
what do you mean?
I know, but see, listen, here's the thing is that there's no like premeditation really. And listen, I know because I even know there's a lawyer in TikTok right now. And I know that premeditation can be a brief fleeting thought. It doesn't have to be like planned out for any, substantial period of time. But he seems to be one of those people who gets super angry in a moment and it's more like a rage.
It'd still be a serial killer.
Okay.
There's rage. There are rage motivated serial killers.
He's definitely rage, but his descriptions of the people so far are more along the lines of, he makes them kind of nameless and faceless. So he says like, there was one in Georgia and he calls her a dope head whore. And I was like, okay, I can't Google that. Right. I can't FOIA that. We're going to have something a little bit more concrete here. But that's the way he describes them. It's people who are disposable. Another one was an immigrant and he was like, yeah, well, I mean, he was illegal, whatever.
So you're going to have, it's going to be a matter of who cares.
Right.
We have plenty of serial killers who look in these types of populations, the sex workers and drug addicts and immigrants and whatnot. So what makes him stand out? Why would there be any reason why we would want to pay attention to him? That's what I would urge you to get at. What makes him think he has something to offer?
He wants the infamy. I can tell that part about him.
Yeah, well, then get him to say what he has to offer. What does he have that makes him stand out, that makes us want to know more about him? Because he has done something that others haven't done, or he has something in his background that refutes our theories, or, get him to tell you why he's special.
Okay. Ooh, I'm going to phrase it just like that too. Why are you special?
Yeah, because that's what will start getting him thinking. What is it about me that merits a book, for example?
I definitely think that because he's been giving me a lot of his background, like his childhood, and like he's gone into pretty great detail, particularly with some stuff with animals and stuff. And I'm just like, yeah, you're kind of fitting the mold here on a lot of things. You're checking all the boxes.
So that's why I would want him to say why. Why does it matter? Why do we need another account of some serial killer blathering on? Right? We have plenty of those. What makes him special? I get these letters a lot. Lots of people want me to write their books, and if you're just people that we know a lot about already, no. I have my time is important, and I want to research things that we need to know about, like the accomplice relationships, because we haven't done very much research on that. And that book turns out to make a contribution. Rader was an outlier to many of our little FBI formulas. That made him really interesting to study. So, what makes this guy unique? What does he bring to the table?
Okay. I'm going to ask him.
Don't tell him I said that.
And if you want to know, just write Dr. Katherine Ramsland. He's a professor too. I do, this is one of those things I was talking with my boss earlier because my boss always tells me, she's like, can't you get a better hobby? Because back in April, me and a friend, we went on a cadaver search. And so she had told me the week before, she's like, it's spring break. She's like, you need to take some days off. She's like, don't tell me that you're not going to, just take at least 1 or 2 days off. So I did. And so when I came back, I said, well, let me tell you what I did on my days off. And I said, and I bet you're never going to tell me to take days off again, are you? And she was just like crocheting, like knitting. And I was like, look, it's what I do. It's what I do. And she knows about like this whole journey with this guy and stuff. And she's just like, again, she's like, I just don't even know how you can do this. And I was like, it's fascinating. I'm not here to like admonish somebody I don't know if people really understand this, but they get so much hate mail. They get so many death threats and so many ill wishes and everything else. I'm more curious about like how they got here and what can be done to prevent this. And I think a lot back to that kid that I was working with because he was 13. At 13, he already had multiple battery victims under the age of 5. He had a rape victim under the age of 10. He had sexual assault victims that were same sex under the age of 10. And he had attempted murder victims. And we're like, this is a kid. Yeah. And I'm sitting here like, somebody, how was no flag like ever raised on this kid? How did no one ever see anything? But that was the thing, that they did see it. And this is something that I don't know if it's jurisdiction to jurisdiction or what, but I know that in my state, I'm in Georgia. I know that in my state, one of the things that really gets me about catching it on the juvenile level is the fact that, first of all, their brains are not developed yet. And they're going through all of these, changes with them and themselves and everything else. And there was nothing about this kid that the law allowed me to alert the school. He was a sex offender. He had multiple sexual charges, and there was nothing that allowed me to go to the school. So we have all of these laws that make it so that adults can't live near schools, but we send these kids in there essentially to shop from their pool of victims because they don't go for older. I mean, they're not going in and preying on adults. Typically, it's other kids. But it was a violation of the constitutional rights, if anything was said. Didn't matter that the case had already been adjudicated once, and he was now facing multiple other charges. Again, we have these sex offender kids that are out there. And if we can do anything to understand it and help prevent other victims to me, that makes all the difference in the world.
Right. That's what I was saying when the woman asked, why do I think it was a woman asked, why do I humanize him? I'm trying to find out the layers of who this person is so that we can identify some of those influences and triggers to their violence. That's part of humanizing. That's not being compassionate, it's just being a researcher.
It is. It is. And there's I don't know, I became interested when I was, when I was younger, but I'm older. I grew up during Adam Walsh and the rise of, America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries and then Cops and, NYPD Blue and all these cop shows that are popping up all over the place. And we didn't have cable. That's what we watched. So, I remember those things. And I remember, just as it kind of evolved, one of the things that you just didn't see enough, you would see people talking about like what they were doing and why these people, like why they're messed up, but not really how they got there and everything else and what could be done to prevent it. And, I don't know.
That's partly because finding out how they got there is a very painstaking, time-consuming process. And, it's unless you're really devoted to doing that, people just don't have the time.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of those things too that, they have to come to certain realizations with their families and, and things that happen to them. And I can say one of the things that I've been advocating very heavily about as well is men's mental health and them talking about things more. Let's normalize them being okay with crying and having feelings and not being just like, oh, boys will be boys, things like that, because they don't need to just bottle it up. Like, let's figure out better ways to do things.
Yeah, I've been saying that since the 70s.
I know.
So,
It's so gross.
yeah.
What was it when I was a kid? It was the sugar and spice and everything nice, were the girls and the boys were snakes and snails and puppy dog tails or something like that.
Right.
And, it was okay that they were supposed to be bad and do bad things and get in trouble and things like that. But, girls weren't. And, if a boy cried, it was like, quit being a girl.
Right. But I think what you're talking about with that one kid, we're not really coming to terms with the fact that kids can have these impulses, can have these violent streaks. It's not a lot of them, but it's enough that we need to take it seriously. Now, we don't know if that particular kid might have had environmental influences, some kind of something going on in the home life, or he has the neurological disorder that we would eventually call primary psychopathy. We don't put that label on kids below the age of 18, but we do know there are kids at risk for becoming adult psychopaths, and we do have programs in place for that. But I think society has a hard time thinking that kids are capable of some of these things.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, 100%. And that's one of the reasons why if I see anybody talking about, things like that, I always try to chime in. You'll see conversations about, can't we just castrate? Okay, well, fine, we can castrate all day long, but that doesn't take away the urge and it doesn't take away the fact that they have other things that they can use.
You'd have to see what their motivation to violence actually is. And It's not necessarily about that kind of urge. It might be punitive. It might rage induced. It might be all like Dennis Rader was already thinking about girl traps and tying girls to railroad tracks when he was a young teenager. He was already thinking that because he wanted to subdue them and immobilize them. And that wasn't really sexual so much as him needing to feel powerful.
Right. Sorry, Andrew. I hijacked you again.
Oh, it's okay. So I have a two-part question, and I want to preface it by saying not all psychopaths, go on to commit violent crimes, and not all quote-unquote pedophiles go on to hurt kids. And why do you think that is? Why do you think some psychopaths don't go on to commit violent crimes and some quote-unquote pedophiles don't go on to harm children?
it's too big of a question. A lot of it has to do with the influences and factors in their lives and how they process their own situations and whether they have the wherewithal to understand consequences and want to make different kinds of choices. But I think it's not productive to talk in generalities. You would have to really, bring me a case, ask me about a particular person, and then let's look at that person's life story. That's where I can be helpful. I don't think I can tell you any formulas by any means to address that question. I really can't.
We
Right,
talked
that
with
makes sense.
Jody Plauché about that, because he was talking about the fact that we needed more potential, like non-offending pedophiles and stuff like that to help with work, with the offending ones. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. And for those who don't know, Jody Plauché is the one whose dad was the guy who killed his son's kidnapper and sexual abuser on national TV back in the 80s.
So where do you want to go from here?
Yeah, Andrew.
Well, we've had you for almost an hour and a half. Do you want to round this out by talking about your books and where people can find them, and maybe talk about a couple of your favorite books that you've written?
Okay. I know a lot of people seem to like a book I wrote called How to Catch a Killer, which is 30 cases of serial killers and the different ways they've been caught. And I categorize that in like some of his police procedures, some of its mistakes they made, some of its forensic innovation. Rarely, but sometimes they turn themselves in, or an acquaintance turns them in. So I talk about, and some of them are cases like Bundy and Warnos, and some of them, but there are cases you will not have heard of before either, and so it's a variety of stories, narratives about serial killers, and the Dennis Rader book, of course. The two I think that are closest to my work is The Serial Killer's Apprentice and Confession of a Serial Killer, about my work with Dennis Rader. But I also really love the novel series I'm writing about a female forensic psychologist who runs a PI agency, because it's based a lot on my own attitudes, my own work, and all of the cases have a basis in fact, in actual cases. So the way they get investigated, like they're kind of that notion ripped from the headlines, but there's twists that are fictional, and that's what I do with these cases. So I've been really excited about that series. The first one is called I Scream Man, like I Scream Man, but I Scream Man. And the one that's coming out in August is called Dead Handed. It's set in Concord, Massachusetts, has very Hawthornian elements to it. And that's been fun because I get to explore things in a more fictional way, but bring in all the forensics I know. Like I have a forensic meteorologist. Most people have never even heard of that profession. My protagonist is a suicidologist. Again, people have not heard of that. So I try to teach forensics through these fictional characters and scenarios, even though the scenarios are actually based on factual stories. And actually, Wayne Henley was instrumental in the second one called In the Damage Path. I was writing at the same time I was interviewing him, and it involves an accomplice kind of relationship, and he was pretty influential in some of the things that happened with that. And you can find them on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or any online book distributor. I think they're pretty easy to get.
Very cool. I like the idea that it's a lead female character too.
Yeah, and she really does do the stuff that I do, and the characters she on her team are people I've actually worked with in the forensic field. I've been on exhumation teams. I consult for coroners. I've done police trainings. So
Have you been to a body farm?
I have not only been there for a full week learning all this stuff, but I've just been invited to another one.
Stop it. Need an
Yeah.
assistant. I will be happy to be the assistant.
It's an exclusive type of course, and so yeah. But I went to the original Body Farm, which is in Tennessee. They began these summer classes, and I was able to go to the very first one, and that was amazing. I was there kind of because I was a writer for the Court TV website, and so I was just recording the things that the people I met and the things that I saw. And we learned a lot about forensic anthropology and how to put together shattered skeletons and figure out what all the bones were and what age and what gender and occupation. And I learned a lot. And that comes into the novels.
Very cool. I worked with the one out in North Carolina when I was doing work with the Atlanta child murders case. And they were so kind and so amazing. I went back to them not long ago to ask them about a case that happened here in Georgia where a woman was found mummified. And of course, I'm sitting there Googling like how to mummify a body and getting everything that has to do with ancient Egypt and stuff. And I was like, listen, I'm just going to go straight to them. And they were so amazing. They came back and they were like, here's your information. Here's some information to check out. And it would happen, this way and this way. And they were giving all types of information. I was like, you guys are my heroes.
Yeah. I mean, you have to have these kinds of facilities in a lot of different states because the soil is different. The climate is different. The weather is different. And yeah, the forensic meteorologist that I have as a character in the second novel has studied at the body farms.
Nice. That's very cool.
Yeah, you probably like these novels.
I know. I'm going to have to check it out because that's right up my alley. I didn't know I would ever like this stuff. I worked in family law for the longest time. Needless to say, it was not very fulfilling. And then I started teaching and I realized how much I love teaching. It's just different. It's the best.
Well, having just retired from it.
I have 6.5 more years before my student loans are paid off.
The grading, it gets to me.
Yes, that I don't like. I don't like that at all. But I'm the department chair. And so my biggest problem right now is they haven't hired me a full-time person. I have 4 adjuncts, but no full-time person. So
good luck dealing with administration.
Getting there.
I was also in the provost office. I know it from both sides.
I'm still learning how the whole process works and stuff. And so it's interesting. It's a learning process there as well. But I do love it. And it's just, I don't know. I like the
law. Is that what you teach, law?
I actually run the paralegal program. I run a paralegal program and I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. I taught at a different school before. It was an entertainment school and I taught entertainment law there. And I thought I was just going to do it for fun and just do one semester. And then I got sucked in because I was like, oh, I really love this. So now here I am.
Good. I'm glad you love it.
But I'm going to retire after my 10 years. Just kidding, students, if you're listening.
Come back after 40 years and tell me if you still.
If I literally, if I could get past the technology that's required, because I just don't like the learning management systems.
Yeah, you have to have that. Now you'd be facing AI in the papers.
I know. And I told my students the other day, I said, listen, if I can't figure this out, we're going to kick it old school. And y'all are just going to have to come put your papers in my Dropbox and that's it. We're going to be done.
Well, that won't, you have to actually have them handwrite them right in front of you. You want to make sure.
True.
Then you have to read handwriting.
That is true.
Nope.
It's interesting. It's an interesting world, but I do like it. And we have a criminal justice program at our school. So I'm trying to get them to take me on their next autopsy trip and stuff like that so that I can, because I don't get to do cool stuff like that.
Yeah. I've been to a lot of autopsies. I was once in a room with 11 of them going on at once.
11 at once.
Yeah, it's in a morgue.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Well, I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you both. I hope I've answered
Yeah,
your
you're one of my
questions.
favorite people to talk to. You, Dr. Burgess, Dr. Bricado, and Dr. Stone, who unfortunately isn't with us anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a loss.
Oh, and Dr. Kimberlin, can't forget those executions. I was amazed with listening to him talk about those the other day, and I was like, no, that's kind of on my bucket list too. I'm very anti-death penalty though.
Yeah.
But he made a good point because he was like, he said something about doing it, for the sake of teaching and, having that well-rounded kind of experience. I might be misquoting him and he's listening right now, but I get it. There's all kinds of questions I get that I can't answer. So
Okay. So are we wrapping it up, or
we're
is there
good.
something else you wanted to know?
Yeah, we're wrapping it up. Thank you so much again. I appreciate it. I look forward to meeting you at CrimeCon next year too, by the way.
We'll see. We'll see, because who knows if they'll even invite me. I never know from year to year.
I've never been, but I'm apparently getting drugged there next year. So
Well, I've been 4 times, and it gets bigger and bigger. This year was 6,500 people, I think. It's huge.
oh wow.
So,
And
but you
then
have to have something new, and I don't know that I will have something new by next year.
hopefully I'll have 11 victims uncovered.
With somebody very unique.
Yes. And yes, I'm gonna have to ask him what makes you special. But I did want to say too, just because I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to tell you this. So my buddy who knows Dennis, right?
Hmm.
So when I told him that I was on the cadaver dig or cadaver search, I wasn't there for the dig. But when I was there for the search, we were with somebody from the task force. And so I heard the story about how he ended up getting sucked into this.
Oh, I see. I know who you were with.
Okay. Amazing. So anyhow, he was telling me about how he got sucked into this whole,
Yeah.
investigation as well. And he said it all had to do with a book.
Yes.
And he
Well,
said,
I have.
yeah, he said to tell you he wants his book back.
I can't give it back to him.
I'll tell him.
I gave it to somebody.
I know he told me that. He said, I think she passed it on to someone else. He said, because when Dennis sent it back, he said he sent it to her instead of me. And he said, and now it's just a mess.
Well, they started thinking there were codes in it.
I know.
It was a silly idea, but
It's because of the cover, he said, because it had the B, the
that
T,
was
and the K.
his idea, not Dennis's.
Oh, I know.
So-
He said that that's what he was telling me. And he said that he said it was just being stupid. And,
Yes.
then next thing he knows, he's getting the sheriff at his place.
Right. Yep. So, yeah, none of that should probably go on your TikTok thing.
Yeah, don't post that on that part.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll cut that out for sure.
Okay.
Look, I didn't say his name though. They're good people though. Interesting though. Absolutely interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Ramsland. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it too.
And
Good night.
TikTok, I'm coming over to you.
Bye.
All right,
Bye.
take care.
Yeah.